All right, let's talk about one of the biggest, most critical challenges in all of farming, water. Having too much can be just as bad, just as disastrous as having too little. So, how in the world do farmers pull off this incredible balancing act to get food from their fields to our tables?
You see, for pretty much every farmer out there, this is the question that's always on their mind. One season, their field could be totally parched, dry and barren, and the very next, it could be a waterlogged swamp. The success of a harvest, and really our entire food supply, it all hangs on getting this balance just right. So let's dive in and break down exactly how they do it.
Okay, so here's the plan. First, we're going to dig into the basic dilemma every farmer faces. Then we'll look at the two main tools they have: irrigation, which is all about bringing water in, and drainage for getting it out. And finally, we'll see how these two, which sound like opposites, actually work together to create the perfect environment for crops to grow.
Right, so you might be thinking, why can't we just rely on the rain? And, well, the simple answer is that modern farming, it demands a level of consistency and productivity that nature, on its own, just can't always guarantee. If we're going to feed a growing planet, we've got to find ways to take control of the water. And that brings us to the first major tool in the toolbox: irrigation. Look, when the skies just aren't cooperating and the crops need water, farmers have to step in and do it themselves. But, and this is a big but, it is so much more complicated than just turning on a sprinkler in your backyard. Let's really get into what it involves. At its heart, the definition is super simple. Irrigation is just the artificial application of water to land for farming. That's it. But how you actually do it, well, that is anything but simple. Yeah, a farmer can't just flip through a catalog and pick a system. They have to be part scientist, part engineer. They're asking questions like, is my land sloped? Because that completely changes how water flows. What's my soil like? Is it sandy, where water just rushes through, or is it clay, which holds on to water for way too long? Every single one of these factors, what crop you're growing, how big your farm is, it all determines which irrigation strategy is going to work and which one is going to be a total disaster. So why go through all this trouble? Well, because the benefits are, honestly, they're transformative. Irrigation isn't just about stopping plants from wilting. It actually makes the soil softer and easier to plow. It helps dissolve nutrients and get them right to the roots where they're needed. It can even flush out harmful salts from the topsoil. And here's the big one. It allows for year-round farming, which can just dramatically boost how much food you can grow. Okay, so we've established irrigation is a total game changer. But how does it actually work? Let's take a look at the three main ways farmers get water to their fields. And as you'll see, each one has its own set of strengths and weaknesses. All right, first up we have surface irrigation. This is pretty much the oldest trick in the book. The easiest way to think about it is like controlled flooding. You basically guide water from a source, say a river, and let it flow over the surface of the land using little channels or furrows. And here we see a classic trade-off. On one hand, surface irrigation is cheap to maintain and pretty easy to set up, which is a huge plus. But the downside? You have very little control. It's basically useless on hilly land, it's not very effective in sandy soil, and you run the risk of literally drowning certain crops that just can't handle being flooded like that.
Okay, next up is a much more modern approach. Imagine this. What if you could get water exactly where it's needed with almost no waste at all? Well, that's the genius behind subsurface irrigation. We're talking about a whole network of pipes buried underground that delivers water straight to the plant's roots. And the benefits of that kind of precision are just huge. I mean, because the water is all underground, you lose almost none of it to evaporation. It's incredibly efficient. Plus, since there's nothing on the surface, your farm equipment can just drive right over it. The catch? Well, as you can probably guess, it's expensive, and you need some serious technical expertise to install and maintain it. And finally, we have overhead irrigation. Now, this is probably what most of us picture when we hear the word irrigation. It's basically any system that sprays water from above the soil, creating a kind of artificial rain. Now, even within this category, there are two main ways to go. You've got sprinklers, which are just like they sound. They spray water everywhere, kind of like rain, and they're great for covering huge areas. But then you have drip irrigation, and this is all about surgical precision. It delivers water super slowly, literally drop by drop, right to the base of every single plant. So it's really a choice between massive coverage or super targeted efficiency. Okay, so at this point, irrigation sounds like a perfect solution, right?
You get more crops, you can farm all year. What's not to love? But, like with anything, there's a catch. When you start artificially adding water to an ecosystem, there are always going to be consequences.
Think about it. That perfectly moist, humid environment that your crops love, well, it's also a perfect breeding ground for pests and all sorts of diseases. And the water itself, the very thing that's feeding the plants, can carry weed seeds and spread them all over your field. And that's not even getting into the practical problems, like the expensive equipment, the high power bills for the pumps, and the fact that you need to know what you're doing. But farmers are nothing if not resourceful. They fight back against these problems with a whole arsenal of strategies. They'll use crop varieties that are naturally resistant to disease. They'll practice crop rotation, planting different things each year to break those pest cycles. They keep their tools and materials clean. And maybe most importantly, they're just really careful not to over-irrigate in the first place.
So, we have spent all this time talking about how to add water. But what happens when Mother Nature gives you way too much? Well, that brings us to the other half of this balancing act: drainage. It might not be as well known as irrigation, but believe me, it is every bit as critical for a healthy farm.
And just like with irrigation, the basic idea is pretty straightforward. Drainage is simply the process of artificially removing excess water from the soil. And this is absolutely essential in places that get a ton of rain or that have soil that just doesn't drain very well on its own.
See, without good drainage, the soil just gets waterlogged. And what that does is it literally suffocates the plant roots. They need oxygen to survive just like we do. Proper drainage totally improves the soil's structure and aeration. It means farmers can get out there and plant earlier, even after a big storm. It cuts down on those diseases that love damp conditions, and it just makes the land a heck of a lot easier to work with heavy machinery. Okay, so we get why drainage is so important. Now let's look at how it's done. Mastering these techniques is really the final piece of the puzzle in creating that perfect environment for crops. And you'll see the two main methods here kind of mirror what we saw with irrigation. First, there's surface drainage, which uses open ditches and drains to carry the water away. It works, and it's cheaper. But those ditches get in the way of tractors, and they take up valuable space you could be farming. The other option is subsurface drainage, using underground pipes to pull the water out from below, just like subsurface irrigation. It's way more efficient and frees up the whole field. But the trade-off, once again, is that it's way, way more expensive. So here's the crucial takeaway. True success in farming isn't about irrigation or drainage. It's not a battle between the two. They are two sides of the very same coin. A truly successful farm is one that has mastered the ability to add water with precision when it's needed and get rid of it efficiently when there's too much. It's all about that constant, delicate balancing act. And that really leaves us with a final big question. These techniques we've been talking about, in some form, they're ancient. They're thousands of years old. But as our climate continues to change, becoming more and more unpredictable, with more intense droughts and more extreme floods, that challenge of keeping the water in balance is only going to get harder. So the question for the future is,